Greetings, everyone. I'm excited to welcome Parker Gilbert, co-founder and CEO at Numeric. Parker, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Ben.
Hey, looking forward to this episode. Going to talk shop here. But first, tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say I didn't get into the finance kind of realm from maybe a typical finance background. I joined an early stage startup straight out of college. This was a pre-revenue, a handful of people company where the mandate was just do whatever needs to get done in a really interesting fintech business in space. Had a blast doing that, and then ended up joining a second startup right around the Series A mark in a sort of role that was a sort of first finance hire, which was just an incredible role and an incredible company in a vertical SaaS business, Hearth, where we were selling a product into general contractors, and just had an incredible time going through first audits, not having an accounting background and kind of trying to make things up on the fly and build work papers and policies, building out first financial models, budgets, going through acquisitions, going through ERP implementations, right? That sort of, process of sort of zero to, okay, we're at least a real size business with some complexity, right? About the operations and scale. And that was just an incredible experience. And so from there, started Numeric and have been building this company since.
Yeah, and that's definitely a trial by fire, learning on the job as the first finance hire. So, where did the idea come up? Was it as you're going through the trenches of just building that finance function? Did it come up there, come up later? Tell us like where the idea came from.
Yeah. So I think it was a really interesting experience at Hearth and kind of an interesting order of operations because it showed up into a company that was starting to really grow. And the very first project was actually go through a financial audit. And I actually did not know that coming in that was going to be the first thing I had to do, but immediately came into a scenario and the balance sheet was not in great shape. There weren't schedules. There wasn't supporting documentation about what was on the balance sheet. It was a really painful experience, but one that really we then built the foundation of the company off of, and I think a lot of the experience there really informed the sort of foundational belief about Numeric, which is everything needs to come back to clean, accurate, auditable, structured financial data. And if you get that layer really right, the models, the forecasts, the budgets, the projections, that work is all insanely easier and smoother when you have, sort of you're pushing the work up the funnel into how are you structuring that information? How are you allocating it and segmenting it? And so, I went through that process there, and had the chance to meet with a lot of amazing companies, many of which have been on your podcast. It seemed like there were just so many incredible businesses being built in this space. And my particular passion was for the sort of maybe lesser sexy auditing and the underlying data questions and the workflows to get to that point of like, okay, how do you get to that financial data set that's really going to be most useful for the business? So it was during that time at that company that we looked for software to go be a solution for us and couldn't find a product that we really thought fit our need or our mandate. And so from there, we kind of started thinking about it. I started, spending time with my co-founders and brainstorming and kind of then coming up with what became Numeric and sort of the product and service that we deliver today.
Yeah, audit can be no yeah, I mean, that's a hard way to start when it's like, "All right, by the way, audit is starting." And, it's interesting, of course, I'm a little biased as a CFO, where else in the org does someone come in and check the accuracy of your work? Of course, in due diligence, maybe tech stack, they come in, check the code, all that stuff, but they're not coming in like, "Hey, this should have been an if statement and this blah, blah, blah." But right, they're checking the work of the accounting function, and it's a bit stressful. But with each audit, you get a little better. It's also a learning experience. So, good and bad there. So, yeah, let's talk about Numeric now. What products and services does Numeric offer?
Yeah, I'll just say on that last point too. I think
Yeah.
it is. It really it I think it was very helpful in hindsight that we went through building our first operating models post having gone through an audit, which I don't think is like typically the order of operations. But you start with like a really solid foundation of really clear data about how are things moving on and off your balance sheet. You can take the same deferred revenue schedule that you prepared for an auditor and use that for your financial model. And so you kind of connect some of these dots. I actually think in a way that some companies start further down the process, which is like building the projections and then kind of eventually getting back to that sort of audit ready financials. And so if we hadn't had that pressure to do the audit for regulators, I'm not sure we would have done it in that order, but I think it was a really interesting process to go through.
Yeah, that's a great point because you learn that early on. And that's why I teach in my SaaS metrics course, help with my fractional clients. It always starts with the accounting foundation, right? And that's not the last thing I look at or calculate or SaaS metrics. Before that's the forecast model, operating model, but it's the accounting foundation first and a deep dive into what's going on. Do we have the revenue set up correctly? Expenses. expense coding, because right, that sets the foundation for your forecast model, operating model, for SaaS metrics, for board data, investor data. So spot on there, and you learn that fast early on, which I love.
Totally, totally. Agree 100%. And so I think, to your question about what does Numeric do,
Yeah.
I think in an abstract sense, our goal is to help make sure teams have just this. They have a great foundation for having accurate financial data that is complete, that is correct, that has all of the right tagging, the allocations, those metadatas, vendors tagged, you name it, such that that downstream work can then commence. And so in practice, what does that look like today? That looks like, one, people are connecting Numeric to their ERP. We're syncing all of the underlying transaction data from their ERP. And then we're building these workflows and processes and controls that are reflective of the work that finance and accounting teams need to do. So very commonly, teams are building out closed checklists. You're right. They're doing the work to make sure everything has actually been completed in their underlying financial data, so it can then be, passed to stakeholders. We do a lot of balance sheet reconciliations, ensuring that schedules tie out against the GL, ensuring that if something changes unexpectedly, we're going to let accounting teams know so they know immediately what changed and why, as opposed to, getting to the end of the close and then realizing that the work they thought they did on day one, was isn't even correct anymore because someone's posted new transactions or things have been edited. And then we get into a lot more of the financial reporting. So creating financial statements, running flux analysis procedures, leaving explanations. We've done a lot around AI to actually go drive kind of first passes of flux explanations, which has been really cool and really neat to see those sort of just growing in consistency every month. And I expect sort of our products will continue to have this sort of theme underlying them, which is how do we empower people to both make sure their data is as correct as possible and then hopefully as actionable as possible as well.
Yeah, correct. And then take action. I love that. There's a lot we could dive into there, but yeah, so many lessons that you just mentioned. One, yeah, just reconciling your balance sheet each month. Don't wait to the end of the year and then something pops up and the auditors catch it. Like that's what you don't want to do. And then you have some P&L adjustment, which is every CFO's nightmare. So you sit on top of the ERP, and ERP meaning this could be QuickBooks, Zero Sage, NetSuite, and so on.
That's exactly right. Yep, we integrate with all four systems you just mentioned.
Okay. Okay. And, so helping with that close process, and I'm sure you talk to a ton of accounting teams. How often do you find where they don't even have a closed checklist, even if it's in a spreadsheet? They're just kind of winging close.
Yeah. It's a question because I think, you're right. At this sort of vantage point, we talk with folks and myself personally with teams that are sort of everywhere on that maturity cycle, and the way I think we would think about things internally would be, we talk with a lot of companies that are at that very first step, which is we need a checklist. We need some level of organization and just tracking again, which gets to the question of completeness. I mean, the whole point of having the checklist is not to have a great checklist in and of itself. Like, it is a tool to answer the question, like, have we done everything we need to do to the underlying accounting data? Right. And that's sort of like the foundations. And that's actually one thing we now offer totally for free, is just a great closed checklist, because we think it is something that hopefully every company finds helpful. And we also think it needs to be simple and clean and really effective. And that just shouldn't be that complicated. But what's been really fun is we now work with public companies that have 50 plus accountants on their team, getting close to 100, that are managing really complex closes. And now those conversations are much more about how do we shave minutes and hours off of our close process? How do we map dependencies and really understand where there are bottlenecks? What can we do pre-close to move one thing earlier this close than we did the last close? And you start to get much more into then the maturity now, where folks are more focused on kind of almost that predictive nature of how do we make sure that we're getting ahead of things during the period and then during the close as well.
I love that. Back in the day worked for, on the FP&A side, but the county manager, she lived to close the books, and she'd tell you. But back then, taking out all these paper binders, of
Totally.
all the recons and reviewing those and manually signing off. So I'm guessing, Parker, today now, forget those binders and papers, because that's kind of more large orgs where it's like, wow, boy, someone has a specific section of the balance sheet that they're reconciling, and I've got a binder where I printed it off, or maybe I got a folder. So I'm guessing now you've taken away that paper binder and put it in numeric.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think the interesting part is that, you really start with the sort of underlying financial data. And again, it's kind of to this point, right, that like a great close checklist it's helpful, but it's not the be all product, right? Because at the end of the day, if you're only really supporting with visibility and kind of the tracking of work, like it's really useful, but it only gets you so far. But If you start with actually the opposite side, which is like, what are all your financial transactions? Now you can start to help people really understand, automate work, start to intuitively understand if there are issues with it. So that could be these simple things, right? Of like, if you're signing off on a piece of paper, you have no way to know if something gets posted in that balance sheet account before the end of that close period and
Yeah.
everything's formally locked. And that stuff drives people crazy because you got to go pull up NetSuite, run a new report if you find it, go look for transactions, figure out, was there one transaction? Were there dozens of transactions that changed? And all of a sudden now you've spent an hour or two of your close process not actually doing something except only doing work, which is kind of trying to help you figure out what went wrong, what changed. But now you can go flag those and you can say, hey, I'm responsible for our deferred revenue account, but Ben just posted a new invoice into it after I signed off on it being complete. Here's the link to it. Go annoy Ben and figure out, what did he do that was
Mhm.
unexpected, and whether you need to book an adjustment, whether you need to reclass something, you can really help people get ahead of that. And I think what's really also changed about the expectations of accounting teams is that people, I think, especially because of all these great forecasting products and other downstream finance tools, people now really want not just ending balance data, but they want all the underlying transaction data, right? They want to be able to have drill downs and granular information to present their marketing team with vendor spend. And in order to do that, now you've got to make sure all the coding is right. You've got to go make sure all the metadata is in the right place. So not only can we help with sort of that tracking and the completeness of things, but you can also start to help get ahead of the questions of, okay, are there issues that starts to become a problem when you hand things off to the finance teams and you start to see, that kind of like the downstream distribution of the data itself.
Yeah, I love that because I say like accounting isn't sexy, but it sure is satisfying. And I find accounting very satisfying, even though I came up through the FP&A ranks, got my CPA later in life. So I love that. And earlier you mentioned metadata, right? It's not just the end, like just a debit credit, but just now that we can do so much with that data, with that metadata, whether it's department coding or product line or geo or something, like you said, down line, there are a lot of tools that now rely on accounting. And, one classic example, at least in SaaS, is like CAC, customer acquisition cost, where people are like, hey, Ben, like, CAC is great. Just one CAC is great, but I need to know it by 10 different product lines and this and that. But you can't do it. Maybe on the revenue side, you know where that revenue is coming from at that detail. But for CAC expenses, that's only as good as your chart of accounts, as good as your coding, as good as your metadata to be able to allocate CAC to certain lead attribution sources.
Totally. Yeah, we at the last company I was at prior to Numeric Hearth, we were running a pretty high volume of low ACV SaaS
Mhm.
subscriptions. And so we lived and died by our payback periods. We were all about optimizing our payback spend and being in control of understanding, do we want it to be at 20 weeks? Do we want it to be 18 weeks? And so much of that comes back to that exact notion of, great, well, you really have to track your expenses at a really granular level. So we would actually track all of our acquisition expenses back to the individual deal that would get closed. And so because of that, we could then do a lot of really interesting data analytics off of it. We could look at ramping reps and like how deals get more efficient as a rep kind of spends more time at the company. You could go and all of that came back to whether you want to do by channel, by geo, by different lead sources, right? But all of that came back to, again, being able to actually take that total sales and marketing number and then drill all the way down into the actual individual opportunity that came as a result of it. And that was something that was really powerful for the business and really important for how we ran our company. But all that again came back to an understanding, which was like we needed clean, allocated, accurate, consistent, fast financial data, to be able to go do it.
Yeah, I love that. And let's talk, yeah, because generic allocations don't help us. Then the CAC comes out the same or the payback comes out the same. But so tell us about your ICP and industries. Are you going after software companies, manufacturing, e-commerce? Who's your target?
Yeah, we work with a pretty diverse set of customers today. Today, we primarily work with companies that have internal accounting teams, so that sort of predicates a company of a certain size. We work with a lot of fintech companies, companies like Brex, Plaid, Wealthfront, Betterment, Mercury, the fintech kind of neobank. We've found a really great fit with those companies where they have some real complexity and real transaction volumes and processing. But that being said, we have customers from healthcare to, some great marketplaces to enterprise SaaS. So a lot of pre-IPO companies, some public companies, a pretty nice mix of things. We even have funeral homes that use the product or racetracks or totally non-tech businesses too, which has been really fun, I think, from my vantage point to get to learn a lot about a lot of different businesses and come into conversations. And be able to ask the questions, great, like what is complicated about accounting for a funeral home? And the answer is it's not the same as a SaaS company, and it's pretty interesting, you know.
Hmm.
So yeah, really have enjoyed the fact that candidly it hasn't been a sort of a very narrow industry specific product or segment.
Okay, so sales qualification criteria, it sounds like internal accounting team, so that makes sense. And is there a certain size where if they just have one staff accountant, that's it, or do they need say three, four, size of an accounting team before this makes sense?
Yeah, we definitely we see teams as early as having their sort of first finance or accounting hire. And we also have a lot of teams now that have sort of a mix of internal and external teams, as you oftentimes see those kind of hybrids as companies maybe hire a head of finance or a VP of finance or a head of accounting and still rely on some outsourced help. And we love the fact, like we think Numeric should be a really powerful product for that first person. We think if we're doing our job, it's a great tool for them to go automate more of their work, to go run leaner and faster. That being said, I would almost think about it as like to some level, almost the complexity of their balance sheet. You know, if a company has got sort of almost all just cash, I don't think we're probably the right product for them. But once you start to then have non-cash things, intangibles, deferred revenues, deferred commissions, leases, any of these things where now all of a sudden there just is more gap accounting to do. I think when you start to see that transition as a company, I think that's when we start to become a really nice fit.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. And not obvious, but I assume you're selling your persona. You're trying to find that controller, that accounting manager, that first finance hire, the CFO, et cetera. So that someone in that finance and accounting team. Then,
Totally. That's
yep,
exactly.
yep. And then, what year did you found Numeric?
Yeah, we founded the company in the summer of 2021.
Okay, all right. So pretty recent. And then, do you have a headquarters location? You virtual or hybrid?
We do. Yeah, we have an office in San Francisco and both New York.
Okay. So San Francisco and New York. Perfect. Fun to visit cities to visit. And what about your current team size?
Yeah, today we have just under 30 people.
30 people. Okay. And then anything you want to share about your current scale, revenue range, ARR?
No, we don't sort of disclose like the particulars of our AR metrics, but this is a business that's been growing great. We've got some amazing customers, like I just mentioned, in the
Yeah.
sort of sized enterprise space.
Yeah, that's great. And then let's talk a little go to market motion, because there's been a lot of talk, like, of like pullback in software spend, and now you've got to sell to the CFO, even if it's not a CFO product. So, how are you finding, how are you prospecting and finding success in your go to market motion, going after a role that traditionally doesn't want to talk to sales folks, wants to just have head down, close the books, forecast. How are you making headway in the office of the CFO or controller?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's one I could talk for hours about, as I think it has been, something that I've learned a ton about, and on a lot of the assumptions I made going in, I think have been totally wrong. Today, we have a pretty I think healthy mix of both inbound and outbound sales. Certainly, I think we really like the controllable and sort of predictive side of how do you outbound effectively, and I think so. That's certainly where we've started. I think that's also just great because it really forces you to distill that language, to distill your messaging, to identify really particularly who are you going after and why. So that's certainly kind of the core of how we've generated a lot of our traction to date. We've started to now spend a lot more time and energy in content marketing and starting to go hopefully build more of a brand and a presence around, communicating interesting things and interesting perspectives around accounting and finance. And then we expect partnerships to be a much larger channel for us than it is today. And we've started to have some amazing partnerships in place with quite a number of advisory firms, some other tech companies. And so we've just started to see that really be a new channel that we actually just made our first partnerships hire and expect to kind of invest more in. But it's been a fascinating process, and every part of this has been, one of those lessons, which is like, you don't typically just flip a switch and everything work overnight. You really have to go pick a channel and that you really want to make successful and go really put your all at making it work. And then, you start to see things kind of months and months later start to pick up and compound. Yeah.
Yeah. And when you're selling to a CFO or a controller, that function is, say, selling the value prop on just better accounting enough, or is it better accounting and some sort of efficiency with the team?
Yeah. I mean, I would argue at the end of the day, it is all about efficiency, and, I think there are certainly sort of benefits, right, to closing more accurately, to getting into audits smoothly. And you certainly see some real savings on just overages and audit fees as you come in more prepared. But at the end of the day, I think we would sort of base the vast majority of our value on the ability to enable teams to do more with less. And it kind of gets back to that notion, which is like a great closed checklist is really helpful. But if all that it's doing is helping you track your tasks, like you really are sort of can only provide so much value. And it is really helpful because as you get to a certain size company, you have accounting, you have people coming and going, you've got people turning over, you've got more tasks than you can do. But for us, it really is all comes down to, can you truly automate underlying work? Can you make the product more predictive, more proactive? Can you help people do things during the continuous kind of period as opposed to at the end of the month? And if you can demonstrate that value, there's like real quantifiable ROI that you can produce.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, we could talk about all these subjects for hours, but let's switch to the fundraising side. How much capital have you raised to date?
Yeah, we've raised a little over $10 million today from some amazing investors, including Founders Fund, Menlo Ventures, HVC, Long Journey Ventures, Friends and Family, and Fifth Down, and a couple others.
Okay. Yeah, and I saw that announcement about a 10 million, I guess, characterized as a seed round. And then, yeah, which is a nice size with the data I track at my SaaS news site about the median, around 4. So nice size for a seed round. And so you started this in 2021. And so what triggers or milestones led you to that raise? Did you know you were always going to raise, or what happened to trigger that seed round?
Yeah, so I think we've always tried to be really sort of intellectually honest and rigorous around that exact question of like what should sort of fire off a desire to go like take dilution, go raise money, and go sort of set the next benchmarks and goals. And very fortunate to start this company with a couple of folks who are much more technical than I am, who could go build a lot of product, and we ran this thing really leanly to go kind of get to a lot of early proof points and traction that I think was a lot of hard work for a couple of people, but I think really put us in good stead to run efficiently and run leanly. Towards the end of last year, I think we really started to see just the pull from that sort of product market fit. You could talk to a customer and really get to the crux of why are they really excited, what makes their eyes light up about the product and the way they use Numeric. You could start to see that translating into customers signing up in increasingly large contracts. And so we really just got to a point where like you could really clearly see both today and what was coming a little bit more predictably that like human hours and time was going to be the bottleneck of growth, right? And I think sometimes you sort of assume that early on is going to be the case, and I think sometimes too soon. And I think in fact oftentimes people really early on are just getting in the way. But when you can start to really see, towards the end of 2023, I was the sales rep, and we were not doing as good a job on some of the sales as we could because I didn't have the time in the day to be intentional and be thoughtful about how we were managing prospects and kind of being more proactive. I think that was a very, very sort of good signal to say, okay, cool. Like we could go put this money to use effectively. We have a good idea of what we're going to go spend this money on. Obviously there's everything to figure out when it comes to how amazing of a business, how do you get as much leverage as possible? But you can at least sort of really look at and have a good idea of, okay, what are we going to go spend this on? And do we feel really good about that investment?
And everybody has a different definition of product market fit, very squishy. And even, asking what you saw, what you saw as product market fit could be hard to answer right now. But I'm going to ask you, like, what did you see, any signals? Like you said, you saw some pull from prospects, but what was that signal or trigger that said it's resonating with your prospects?
Yeah, I think, I think it's one of those things that I think you could see at a certain point a consistency across not just the engagement data, but more so talking with customers, really what they got excited about, and when you started to see some of that consistency, I think like the goal of me sort of being the account exec was great. How do I translate that into the sales process? And it turns out that didn't happen overnight. It really took quite a lot of iteration and refining to sort of take that kernel of something that people thought was really special about the product and pull it into how we communicate in the sales side of things. But once we sort of started to figure out those pieces, you could just start to see things moving more quickly. You could start to see a real resonance with prospects. You could start to see just like a real, even in a relatively small amount of numbers, you could start to see, okay, great. Like if we generate more leads, like we have a rough idea like what this should convert at, and let's go kind of invest in top of funnel, and let's go start to make those investments that are going to pan out both today and in the future. So there's something about the like consistency from the sort of qualitative product customer engagement through how that resonates with the top of the funnel that I think when you can start to put those pieces together and you start to have a sense of things kind of working along the way between those places, that starts to feel very real because obviously, something that great that you tell a prospect, like if the customer doesn't then realize that benefit, that's not really product market fit. But if you have something that a customer really loves, but you cannot communicate it to the market, I think in many regards that also isn't really product market fit.
Yeah, I love that last point. Yeah, maybe you have a valuable product, but if you cannot convey that, communicate it, yeah, you
Yeah.
still got to work on that. So I love that. So appreciate that insight. So raise that about $10 million seed round. And for the other founders listening, thinking about a seed round, any fundraising lessons that you'd like to pass on with that seed round?
Yeah, I think that I think we've been very intentional about how we've approached fundraising and thought about things. And one, I think at a very basic level, like being intentional is really important. It is very easy to get swept up into what other people think you should do, how other companies have done things, what investors want you to do or their prospects. And so I think having a very clear game plan about what you believe about the company, the stage, the capital you can put to use, I think is really foundationally important to not let yourself get kind of pushed or pulled by, external perspectives because you in the seat will have 1,000 times more data points than anyone else to go make the best decisions possible. And at the end of the day, you have to go kind of live with them. And then I think sort of a posturing, which I think, is great for this sort of like CFO and sort of finance community. You should always be prepared to fundraise at the drop of a dime. I truly believe you should have financials that are ready to send out at all times. You should have materials that you've been thinking about and iterating on in the background when they're not sort of top of mind. I don't think you should just be saying, great, we want to fundraise, next February. Let's go start in December getting ready. I think that is something that you kind of do iteratively all the time and you're always refining. And I think part of that is also just building relationships with investors, having a sense of who's interested, who's in the space, having the chance again to sort of refine that pitch. I mean, I think if you look at sort of how we communicate what we do, I think it's very different than it was a year ago. And a lot of that was just getting reps and learning and understanding, okay, how can we really kind of crystallize our vision, our goals, our ambitions, such that at any point, if you said, great, the business is at a place right now that a fundraise makes a lot of sense, you can hit the ground running, you can have a clear game plan. And I think that has really benefited us.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, be intentional with that. Yeah, it takes a lot of work. So, yeah, Parker, at this stage of your business, do you have a favorite number or metric that you're using to guide the business?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there are probably a couple. I think maybe three stand out
Mhm.
that I can kind of briefly speak to. First one, which I think will be unsurprising given our conversation, really obsessed with top of funnel generation. How many leads are we generating? Even if you've got world's best product and you're great about communicating the value prop, if you are not getting in front of people now, there's only so much pipeline that you can close, right? And so I think we've been really obsessed with, okay, how do you get in front of the right people at the right time? How do you sort of build those things that will even open the door to you going and achieving the growth that you want to achieve? I think the second one, we have sort of metrics internally on how we think about activation and sort of successful activation. And we really obsessed with that time to value and how quickly can you get someone to being activated and sort of really seeing some ROI. I think one of the things we love about this product is like you can start with someone on June 26th and say, great, we know when your next closes. It isn't, 5 days, 4 days. Great. Like, cool. What do we need to do to go make that process 20% better? And then how do we make the next one 30% better? And so really focusing on what are the things we need to do as a business, whether it's people on our solutions team, whether it's improvements to software, to design, to really making sure that that first close process is just awesome. Um, and then I think more on like the sort of finance side of things, I've always personally found the burn multiple metric to be a really helpful one. I think that's a great way to sort of have a rough idea of are your costs aligned with your ARR growth. I don't think it's perfect, but I think it is a nice sort of back of the envelope metric to be looking at and to sort of say, okay, are you out of bounds? Are you not out of bounds? And is this sort of roughly in the right frame of reference that you expect to operate against?
Okay. So, yeah, appreciate that. So top of funnel generation, activation, I love, yeah, personally as a CFO, yeah, that time to value. When can I see value? Is it 12 months from now? Or maybe expectations are higher today, like really fast in a couple months. So, and burn multiple. So Parker, appreciate your time today. As we wrap up, what's coming up next for Numeric?
Yeah. I think you can expect a lot of product from us. We're going to go try and put our work and the money we've raised to work, expanding our R&D team, building new product. And I think this is a really fascinating time to be in any tech industry with sort of the rise of generative AI and the kind of the new like things that are now possible that weren't. But particularly in the CFO space and in accounting, I think we should really have some high expectations that AI and generative AI should be really important. And so my hope and my expectation as a company is that we're really taking a step back and trying to really rethink some of these foundational accounting processes, whether they are how do we reconcile our balance sheet? How do we provide insights to people? How do we flag discrepancies? How do we build these systems from the ground up that hopefully are just meaningfully more intelligent than they've been in the past? And I think if we can do that, I think we hopefully can build a really amazing company for our customers, for our employees, for our investors. So hopefully stay tuned for some pretty cool and hopefully pretty novel product releases in the coming months.
Well, look forward to following your product roadmap coming up. So, Parker, again, really appreciate your time today sharing your journey. If listeners would like to learn more about Numeric, where should we send them online?
Yeah, please head to numeric.io. And we are hiring. We're looking for folks on the sales team, on the engineering team, on our solutions team. We love hiring former finance and accountants. So even if there's a job that doesn't look exactly right on it, but you're interested and you're in San Francisco or New York, we are in person. Please reach out. We'd love to meet. And even if it's not today, maybe there's a great role in the future too.
Yeah, sounds great. So check out numeric.io and they're hiring. So check them out. And if, yeah, sales engineering solutions, that's great. So Parker, really appreciate your time today, sharing your journey and insight.
Yeah, likewise, Ben. Thank you so much for having me.